but it isn't what we're voting on today, and that's why I come to the floor. Back on page 8 of the executive calendar of the United States Senate is a long list of nominations that are pending before the Senate, and one of these, which is calendar number 629, on the message number 1402, is the name Brian Allen Benczkowski of Virginia to be an Assistant Attorney General. You would have to search the executive calendar to find it, but it's going to be voted on this afternoon in the Senate. Is it another routine nomination? Not at all. This is a position in the Department of Justice. An Assistant Attorney General, who is the leader, is responsible for over 600 federal prosecutors who are prosecuting cases across the criminal spectrum, from treason against the United States to opioid crisis, everything in between. 600 men and women, professionals spread across the United States, prosecuting the laws, the cases on behalf of the United States government. And now President Trump has suggested that he wants this man, Brian Allen Benczkowski of Virginia, to be in charge of those 600 prosecutors. Is this a big assignment? In the Department of Justice, it is one of the biggest assignments. He will be directing the cases that are filed on behalf of the United States of America, critical cases to protect our national security, critical cases relative to crimes that are being committed, critical cases when it comes to our rights as citizens. He will be leading 600 federal prosecutors. Is it not reasonable for us to ask a basic question about Brian Allen Benczkowski of Virginia? We did in the Judiciary Committee. And here's the question we asked. Mr. Benczkowski, you are seeking the position of Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal division with 600 prosecutors that you will direct. Please tell the committee how many cases you have prosecuted as a lawyer. First, civil cases. The answer? None. Oh, well, how about criminal cases? How many criminal cases have you prosecuted in your lifetime as a lawyer? None. How many motions have you filed before a federal court? None. Wait a minute. You are being chosen to head up the criminal division of the Department of Justice, and you have no experience. You have never prosecuted a case, never once been in a federal courtroom, not one time? That's a fact. You know, so far, President Trump has sent us a record number of nominees for the federal courts. And I will tell you, as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, all but 2 have been approved. I think some of them are awful choices, and some are good. But the awful choices are men and women who have said and done things in their legal practice and private lives which really raise serious questions about whether they have the temperament to be a federal judge. Without exception, except for 2 cases, without exception, all of the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee have voted every time for Trump nominees. The 2 exceptions were a district court judge from Louisiana and a district court judge from Alabama. And in both of those cases, people who were being appointed by the Trump administration to a lifetime appointment in a federal district court had no experience in a federal courtroom. I can tell you that one of the hearings on one of the Trump nominees, and I won't bring his name up for the record, but you can find it if you wish, cross-examination by a Republican senator on our committee, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, was devastating. This Trump nominee couldn't find his way to a federal courthouse with GPS. He had no experience whatsoever in trying a case. And so the decision was made to withdraw his nomination. Only twice in a year and a half have Trump nominees been so unqualified that they've withdrawn their nominations. And now, this afternoon, we consider Brian Allen Benczkowski of Virginia. to head up the criminal division of the U.S. Department of Justice. A man with no experience, none, in a federal courtroom. Not in a civil case, not in a criminal case. But there's more to the story. Why is he here? He's here because at one point in his career, he was chief of staff to then Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama. Worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I remember seeing him. He looked like a competent, affable Senate staffer. We didn't have any direct relationship. But now that Senator Sessions, has been elevated to Attorney General, he wants this chief of staff, Brian Allen Benczkowski, to head up one of the most important divisions in the Department of Justice. That's his connection. That's his angel. That's why his name's on his calendar. That's why the Trump administration chose him. If that were the end of the story, it would be bad enough. Someone with no experience whatsoever prosecuting a case to head up 600 federal prosecutors. But as they say, and Paul Harvey used to say, there's more to the story. You see, what happened was this. Follow me, if you will. After Donald Trump won the presidency and was in his transition period, Mr. Benczkowski left his private practice of law to be part of the Trump Transition Committee assigned to the Department of Justice. And between November and January, the swearing in, he served on that transition committee, trying to smooth the way for the new administration to take over the Department of Justice. At the end, when the president was sworn in, President Trump was sworn in, Mr. Benczkowski left the transition committee and went back to his private practice here in Washington for a well-known firm. But before he returned to that firm, he sent a letter to the president saying, I hope that you'll consider me to appoint me as a U.S. attorney somewhere in the United States. Remember, he has no experience, none. Never prosecuted a case, but he suggested he wanted to be considered for that lower level position compared to the head of the division as he returned to private practice. He went back to his law firm, followed the story. He goes back to this law firm, and one of the partners at the law firm calls him in and says, I need for you to take over a case to represent one of our firm's clients. The client is known as Alpha Bank. Alpha Bank. It is a Russian bank. And it's a Russian bank, as I described the story, is very significant in terms of our conversation today about the Russian impact on the U.S. government. Alpha Bank needed Mr. Benczkowski to look at the so-called Steele dossier. Do you remember that? The memo that came out about then candidate Trump and things that were alleged that occurred in Russia? Well, they asked Mr. Benczkowski, represent the Alpha Bank because their name popped up in the Steele dossier, and we think it's terrible, and they want to consider a defamation lawsuit. So Mr. Benczkowski takes on the Alpha Bank as a client in reference to allegations made in the Steele dossier. There's more to the story. During the course of the Trump campaign, there were unexplained pings and contacts between Alpha Bank and the Trump campaign computers. More than one. Still unexplained as to why this Russian bank would have any access or communication with the computers of the Trump campaign. You see, the Alpha Bank is not just another corner bank. The Alpha Bank is run by individuals who are oligarchs in Russia. They are closer to Vladimir Putin than you can imagine. When the Alpha Bank decided to open up its London office, they invited as their guest for the opening of the office Vladimir Putin, who traveled to London to be there for the opening of the office of the Alpha Bank. So this Alpha Bank is pretty well connected. And they had some communication, still unexplained, between that bank and the Trump campaign. And now Mr. Benczkowski is representing the Alpha Bank on a question of defamation lawsuits concerning the Steele dossier. Wouldn't you just think for a moment that if you were Mr. Benczkowski, considering the possibility of a job in the Trump administration, you would have said to your law firm, I'm not going to touch this one. We have all these allegations about Russian involvement in the campaign. We have some computer contact between Alfa Bank and the Trump campaign. We have this oligarch close to Vladimir Putin personally. We have this Steele dossier which mentions the Alfa Bank. Wouldn't you think that the average lawyer would say, sorry, to his law firm, I'm being considered for a position in the Trump administration. I'm not going to get close to the Alfa Bank. No. Mr. Benczkowski said, I'll do the work for the Alfa Bank. Well, when the time came and he wasn't considered for a U.S. attorney spot, he was considered to head up all the U.S. attorneys, to head up the criminal division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Benczkowski filed all of these papers about all of his activities as a Senate staffer, as a lawyer, and all the rest. He failed to disclose in the course of that he'd represented the Alfa Bank. Not good. It was discovered with some background checks through the FBI that he was in that position. So he was confronted. And basically we said in the committee, are you going to recuse yourself from any matters before the Department of Justice involving the Russian investigation? No, he said, I won't. I'm going to stick with involving myself in the Russian investigation. Well, what will you recuse yourself from in light of this representation of Alfa Bank? I won't take up any cases involving Alfa Bank. That's it? That's it. That's the best we could get from him in terms of recusing himself from any potential conflict of interest. Why is this important at this moment in time? Because at this moment in time, I don't know when Bob Mueller will complete his investigation. I don't know how the White House will react. I don't know what will happen with the Attorney General Sessions, who now has recused himself from the Russian investigation. I don't know what will happen when it comes to any threats to the Assistant Attorney General in terms of his future. But there is a possibility that if this president decides that he is going to take an action which is going to have a direct impact on the Mueller investigation, if he decides, for example, that he is going to remove from consideration of this in future the Assistant Attorney General who appointed Bob Mueller, I'm talking about Rod Rosenstein, a vacancy in that position could be filled by Mr. Benczkowski. He could take up that position. Is this an important decision then? Back here on page 8 of the calendar, voted on this afternoon? I think it is. First, the obvious gross incompetence and inexperience of this man to head up the criminal division of the Department of Justice. Second, the fact that he represented the Alfa Bank, which is under suspicion and investigation as to its activities. Third, the close connection between Alfa Bank and its owners with Vladimir Putin in Russia. Fourth, the ongoing investigation of the Russian involvement in our last election campaign. Fifth, the threat that this could occur again in the future. Sixth, the fact that we need an aggressive Department of Justice to stand up and protect the right of vote of every single American. The list goes on and on. This is the wrong man for this job. I cannot believe, as a proud Democratic senator, that the Republican Party couldn't find one experienced prosecutor in the United States to take over the criminal division of the Department of Justice, and instead they're going to give it to a man who has never, ever darkened the door of a federal courthouse. That's what they're doing. It shows you the lengths they're going to go to, and it shows you the importance of just another nomination stuck on page 8 on the calendar that'll be voted on this afternoon. And here's the question. It's a majority vote. There are 50 Republican senators and 49 Democrats in this chamber. Senator McCain, of course, is ill and hasn't been here for several months. 50 to 49 of those likely to attend today. Under the rules as written in the Senate, a majority vote could move this man forward, Mr. Benczkowski. That's all it takes. What it boils down to is whether or not any Republican senators see a problem with this nomination. I hope that each one of those senators will reflect on the fact that they personally know a handful of individuals, maybe more, who are more qualified to take on this critical job than Mr. Benczkowski. Please join us in stopping this nomination. Let's put somebody on this job that understands it has experience. How many people would walk into a lawyer's office and say, I'd like you to represent me. Have you ever had a case like mine before? And the lawyers say, nope, never seen one like this, never represented anybody like you. And the client would reply, perfect. That's just what I'm looking for. Someone who is so inexperienced and so incapable of representing me, I can't wait to pay you your fee. Let's not pay the fee to Mr. Benczkowski. Let's return him to his private practice. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.